in life and when it comes to the management of energy, we need to understand that this concept right here, right? There's energy, right? The fuel that it takes to work, to exert effort, right? There's work, which yields the resource of validation. Now, this validation could be personal, self-validation. This can be external validation, or this can be sexual validation, right? So understand, like I said, when it comes to the instinctual variance, we have social, sexual, and self-preservation. Self-soothing, self-validation, that's self-preservation, right? There's within our intimate relationships, that's sexual, right? This is how I break it down. And then we have social, which is external validation, right? So there's energy, there's work, and there's validation. There may be more things, but this is just something I'm talking up off the top of my head, right? Now, we have to understand that the cycle of energy works through this model. This is where the positive feedback loops come from. Now, sometimes validation can kickstart and can convert into energy, right? Sometimes validation can kickstart, get converted into energy, and then that energy is used to work. And a positive feedback loop is all about this, right? It's all about this. There's energy you have already, then there's energy you gain externally, right? And then that energy is fuel. That energy is the fuel that you have to exert effort, which is work. And then there's validation. Now, there's different forms of validation, right? Like sometimes there's emotional, there's social, there's financial, there's sexual. Right? Emotional, social, financial, sexual. Then there's also self-soothing or personal self-validation. Now, the power of self-validating is one of the most powerful things, but we also have to understand that if you're a person who is extremely focused on self-validation, but that self-validation isn't combined with a positive outcome, or it doesn't encourage you to work in a way that leads to external validation, then it's very easy to get set in your ways and to not actually move forward. And that's really where the issue of porn addiction can be a problem for people, right? Because what happens when you watch porn, that dopamine hit that you get from watching porn, it feels almost like a pseudo form of validation. You exert work, and that work is to pleasure yourself. You get pleasure, right? That's also a form of a dopamine release. But that work and that pleasure is something that may siphon your energy. And if you don't use that in a positive manner, then you can find yourself in a loop of a negative feedback loop of never getting out to do something that gives you positive external validation. You know, many people are on this kick of being against the ego and being against external validation. I don't think that's a positive thing. Humans are social creatures. I'm an introvert, and I admit that humans are social creatures to where external validation is a thing, right? Now, sometimes what you observe, let's say you can use porn in a positive way. Like, let's say you can use porn to increase your attraction to what you have in front of you, which increases the value of the validation that you receive from the partner in front of you. Now, how can that work? Let's say you watch BBW porn. Let's say you have a woman who's a BBW, or she's gained some weight. She's still good to you. She still do what she's supposed to do. But you're socially conditioned to value the validation of a woman who is smaller over a woman who has a little weight on her. Now, if you go and watch some BBW porn and you really get into it, then what it does is you can transmute that attraction onto the attributes, if you're focusing on the attributes that your partner has within the porn that you're watching, then what it does is increases your attraction to the partner who's in front of you, so that it doesn't feel as if you need the external validation of someone separate from your relationship, but it pushes it more so inward, right? And let's say we're also talking about, let's say you have a woman who's getting older. Let's say you're a man who has a fear of a woman who's getting older. Watching gilf porn can help that. Them gummy videos, you know what I'm talking about, right? Seeing a woman who's in her 40s or her 50s, God forbid, maybe even her 60s, right? I ain't judging. But when you see that and you're able to observe and get beyond the superficial level, or even to fetishize superficial things that aren't typically viewed as the peak of human experience, what you give yourself the ability to do is to add value to the validation of where the source of the validation you may receive in real life is coming from. What you focus on plays a big part. And this happens a lot with women when it comes to social media, how it leads to a lot of them having a lot of depression and negative senses of self, negative perceptions of self, because they'll see women who are altering their pictures. They'll see women who are just more attracted to them that they probably wouldn't have had to see and be accustomed to on a regular basis. They'll see how much attention those women are getting, not perceive themselves as having enough energy to work towards getting to a place where they can receive a similar level of validation. Then they might start acting real thirsty for attention, right? Well, you have to understand that there's a difference between quality validation versus quantity validation, right? Validation that you work for that actually has a positive feedback loop with things that will improve the quality of your life is like a nice steak. It's like a good, high quality steak. But a bunch of low level validation, which is thirsty niggas on the internet, or, that's junk food. That's what it is. Right? Or the validation of a man who is purposefully and malignantly and maliciously manipulative to get a reaction. At times that can be like a drug. Like women who are addicted to toxic men. And I have my toxic traits. I'm working on it. But at the same time, we got to understand is that that's part of that, right? Now, these things can be separate and they can have some correlation. So there are times where a person may have a little bit of toxic traits, but ultimately their goal is the positive outcome of everybody involved. That's not what I'm talking about, right? But there's energy, then there's work. The energy is fuel to work, right? The work is what yields to the validation, the reward. The reward gets transmuted and broken down and reconverted into energy, right? So sexual transmutation can work like this, right? The true physiological effects of NoFap only are like a week worth, right? Like 1 week of not ejaculating can give you the effects of NoFap. Anything beyond that is purely, psychosomatic. Anything beyond that is purely, placebo effect of self-validating yourself based off of your capacity to not indulge on things that you enjoy. Sometimes it's a practice of asceticism, right? There's self-preservation. And within self-preservation, that is self-validation, self-soothing through your ability to not seek external validation, but through your ability to validate yourself. So we got to understand there's energy. We all have a baseline level of energy. When somebody's experiencing depression, what really happens is that their cup becomes a cup with holes in it. And their baseline level of energy is not high enough to put in the work that will give them the validation that they desire, or they have an inability to receive that validation in a way that boosts their self-esteem. Right? If you're unable to receive external validation in a way that boosts your self-esteem, in a way that leads to a positive feedback loop of doing things that will improve the quality of your life and the quality of your relationships, then you can find yourself in a negative loop, a very negative feedback loop of only feeling as if you find solace and security or comfort in things that don't actually give you a positive feedback loop. Addictions can work like that, right? And not all addictions will have that effect, but most of them will have a negative effect and outcome. I'm smoking a black right now, BLK, one of them BL Kizzies, right? No, this is not something for me to do forever. But certain things do have that effect. Like, some people drink coffee and drink caffeine. What does it do? It gives you energy. But it doesn't really give you energy. All it really does caffeine does is it blocks the receptors in your mind that tell you that you're tired, so that you're able to exert more energy. But eventually you're going to crash off of that, right? Now, sometimes that can be a positive thing if you crash and then you finally get some good sleep if you're an insomniac and you drink your coffee or your caffeine earlier enough in the day so that you're in a position to where when you finally get off of work or you finish taking care of the things you need to take care of, you're in a position where it's like, all right, cool, now you can finally go to sleep when you get off. So certain things can work in a positive manner, right? And this is where dominant and submissive is really like the sexual polarity quadrant really plays into a lot of things. See, when you're a masculine dominant, you're offering pleasure in exchange for power. And if you're a masculine dominant, when you're offering pleasure in exchange for power, you're taking that power to benefit not only yourself, but the other person you're interacting with. So that means that you're creating a positive feedback loop, that the control that they're giving up to you in exchange for the pleasure that you give them is something that's ultimately going to benefit at least 2 or 3 places, right? Either themselves or the relationship, you or the relationship, or you and them, right? If it's only one of those, then it's not going to be mutually beneficial, and ultimately it's going to lead to a negative feedback loop, right? So if it's only them, but it doesn't benefit you or your relationship dynamic, then ultimately you're going to be draining too much of your own energy off, right? If it's only the relationship, but not you or her on an individual level, that can also create a negative feedback loop. It can oftentimes lead to certain levels of enmeshment. If it only benefits you, then it's extremely selfish, right? Extremely selfish. And eventually that's going to burn out. So we have to understand the concept of energy that's used as fuel for work, right? Energy that's used as fuel for work. Work that's used to gain validation. And then validation that gives more energy. And this is the positive feedback loop. This is how it works. So when you're masculine dominant, a woman who's feminine submissive, she already has a certain level of energy because that's a high cup space, right? And so within that high cup space, because of the pleasure you're providing her, she's willing to pour out energy to do work. Now from that work that she does, if that work leads to a positive feedback loop of getting her closer to you, of strengthening the bond of your relationship, of increasing how attractive she is not only to you but to others, then that positive feedback loop, that validation that comes from you, that comes from feeling safe in the relationship, that comes from other people seeing a glow on her, that comes from other people seeing the changes that she's made to be feminine submissive with you, that those things make her more attractive to others and they give her validation for that. The way that this positive feedback loop works is if she takes that energy that she gains and then she pours it back into you and back into the relationship, then it creates this loop to where things continue to go up. They continue to increase. But when things become stagnant, people feel unsure about a situation. They oftentimes, even if a woman's feminine submissive, she may go into a survival mode where she goes into the masculine submissive, right? And things become transactional. Or rather than working for the validation, she wants the validation up front, right? That subverts the dynamic, right? Or wants an immediate return on the validation from the effort that she's put in without actually meeting the standard necessary to receive the level of validation that she desires or that she needs. Therefore, things stay at the same place that they're at instead of increasing and instead of getting to a higher level. And although she may desire and damn near require that level of validation for the things that she does, after a while, she'll see that things are not increasing, things are not improving, things are not moving forward. So she will no longer trust or place a high value on the validation that you give her because things are staying stagnant. This is how a lot of the sexual polarity quadrant works. Through energy, if you have a high level of security, then you can have an internal or even external validation that you already have that gives you a certain level of energy. See, this is how a lot of the non-stick principle and let that hurt go pussy works, right? Like when a woman's going through let that hurt go pussy, oftentimes she's received a lot of validation. Or let's say the non-stick principle. Let's say a woman has spent a lot of time in a long-term relationship. The dude didn't have the dominance to tap her into her sexual shadow. But she's received a lot of feeling valuable for a relationship. That's something that validates and strokes her ego. She's experienced a lot of emotional validation. Maybe the man pursuing her emotionally. She's experienced a lot of maybe financial investment. Maybe not a lot, but some, right? All the energy that's poured into her during that period of time, being masculine submissive with maybe her first long-term boyfriend before she integrates her shadow. Even if she doesn't feel like releasing that to the man she's with, it's still in there. And this is where the value of validation becomes a powerful thing. Because if she comes across a dominant man, then oftentimes it'll be the floodgates will open up. It's like a Pandora's box. I've been at other men on many occasions. So we got to understand feedback loops, positive feedback loops. A lot of life is predicated. You got to understand the amygdala. You have to understand different aspects of how the mind works. Right? And this is why as a masculine dominant, you set standards and you have a stretching program. The reason why your program stretches is because that stretching is about growth. There might be growing pains, but when a woman's in the high level of the feminine submissive, right? In the high level of feminine submissive, and it's not a gender thing, but I'm a heterosexual man, so I'm speaking from this perspective. When there's a high level of feminine submissive, pain mixes with pleasure. Right? It's like when somebody's in a boxing gym or karate dojo, and they're learning these new techniques. They're spending their money to go to the gym, right? The increase of the investment makes them more invested in wanting to follow through with that process. And it also shows that they value the information that they're given. That stretches them, stretches their mind. Now, when they go through this process, they're exerting effort and work. Now, what is the reward for that work? Well, one, that reward for that work at times is going to be more instruction. And it's also going to be praise. You did a good job at the gym today. I like that work you did. Oh, man, that was a good combination. That shit was fire. You know what? You're getting better and better. That validation means something, right? Because it gives you more energy to be willing to put in more work. Sometimes it's the belt system. You know, you got your white belt and your yellow belt and your green belt and your blue belt and your purple belt and your brown belt and your black belt, right? Each level of belt is a level of validation, and sometimes that level of validation is a level of authority. Like when we're understanding the belt system of different martial arts. And I know we have white stripes in between there, then we have different dons of black belt. But all these things, they cooperate with each other. And this is why I think transitional dating is such a great model. Because rather than leading with the full package, you're setting standards on each different level. Now, each different level of standards that you present make the woman more attractive to you, make the relationship work better, and also they gain respect and validation for her and for you and for y'all. That extra level of validation gives an extra level of energy. So we have to understand how energy, not energy work, but how energy, work, validation, how that cycle works. That's the cycle of energy. And see, the reason why I say not to leave with the full package most of the time is because when it comes to this process, we have to understand that in order for especially monogamous relationship, but really mostly primary partnerships to work over the long term, this has to be a cycle that works between both people. Right? Like I say, trust a woman whose encouragement is to encourage you to do things that make you more attractive to herself and to others and to yourself. Right? Like when a man becomes domesticated, it's because he's dealing with a woman who's encouraging him to do things that make him feel less attracted to himself, less attractive to her on a polarity level, and less attractive to others due to her own insecurities. It's like the husband you see walking around with ugly ass shirts and outfits on getting fat. And she encourages that because society, she's not integrated enough. Understand this. Part of the Delilah syndrome that I talk about is not always a purposeful thing. Oftentimes the Delilah syndrome is a woman who's heavily inundated in a social programming that's based on premature integration, where a woman wants to value a man based off of his emotional investment and his emotional maturity and his emotional intelligence, being emotional, before she's actually been able to respect this man as a man, before she's been able to respect this man as someone who can truly satisfy her sexually, someone who's emotionally stable and consistent, as someone who's strong and solid on his stance. She wants to see him be emotional and vulnerable. And something in her core, although she may like it because it gives her validation, it's validation she hasn't earned. So ultimately, it lessens the value of the validation and it causes her to respect the man even less. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be a man or that there aren't men who are already integrated within themselves, but they understand this stuff already. And they have an overflowing cup. I'm talking about cup theory here as well. There's low cup, there's high cup, there's overflowing cup. Right? So the positive feedback loop for a man would be, okay, cool, the things that a woman encourages him to do. Right? I'm not saying she's the one telling him what to do, but the things she encourages, the things that she validates, are things that actually increase her attraction and her respect towards him. Right? Now, once that woman becomes integrated, then her masculine energy and her dominant energy comes out as well. But it's on the same page as the man she's with. So she may actually appreciate the man being emotionally vulnerable without losing respect for him. Most dating coaches aren't on this level of conversation. They're going to say be hard all the time. That's what most coaches are going to say. Or they're going to say try to take the vulnerable narcissist route, right? I'm talking about understanding the value of validation. And I'll say this too, there's pre-qualified versus qualified. Pre-qualification versus earned qualification. When you take the masculine dominant role, you have to have enough security to work off of a concept of being pre-qualified and submitting yourself to your own program, submitting yourself to your own principles, knowing how to self-validate, but also knowing how to make yourself intrinsically desirable for the external validation or the sexual validation that will come out of the interactions that you have within the opposite sex, right? And that will encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. Now, eventually, if you actually want to take a woman serious, you're going to have to integrate your anima. Eventually, for a woman, if she's going to want to take a man serious, she's going to have to integrate her animus. Don't think that a woman's going to stay only at the state of feminine submissive forever. It doesn't work like that. When she integrates her animus, if who you are as a man influences her animus, then what's going to happen is that she's going to buy into and be invested in your program. It doesn't mean that she's going to believe 100% of the things that you believe with no questions asked. But it does mean that some of the core tenets of your beliefs are going to be things that she's already seen positive feedback loops from, so that she sees that as part of her logical, not emotional, but her logical thought process. It influences her core beliefs and values about the way the relationship should work. So that when she's in a masculine dominant state, she buys into your program, and she may even hold you to your program at times when you're off. See, a woman can check you based off of what you say, off of who you say you are, what you say you're trying to do. If you aren't solid on that, that's on you. See, there's a difference between a woman who's trying to check you off of her idea of who she thinks you should be versus a woman checking you off of who you say you are and who you've shown yourself to be. There's a difference. If the things a woman is encouraging you to do are things that will actually lead to her respecting you more, she right. Right? But we have to understand premature integration. That's when a person hasn't integrated their shadow, but they're in a position of wanting a person to have an integrated anima or animus with them. Right? Like, I'm not going into a situation expecting every woman to be so integrated with her shadow and her animus that she's not going to view me as one or the others, either the gentleman or the gigolo. I expect that. Now, what does that mean? That means that if I'm the gigolo, in her mind, I have to be able to establish my program. And establish my program in a way where she's experiencing this great dick. You know, she might get a little bit digmatized, but ultimately, when she comes out of that digmatized state, she has to realize, like, hold up, when I was in this state of mind, my life was getting better. How I felt about myself was getting better. My mental health was getting better. How I felt about the relationship, how I felt about me, and how he felt about me was improving. So the actions that I took in this feminine submissive state are things that corroborate my logical thinking. If that doesn't happen, then that woman may play the anima for a little while, try to get with it, but if she doesn't receive the pleasure, or if that pleasure takes out more energy than she has, then when she comes out of that state of mind, she's going to feel like she gave up too much, and then she's going to shut down. It's going to seem as if you were bait and switched. Right? So these are just important concepts to keep in mind, man. Positive feedback loops are so important. You want to reward good behavior, but you also need to understand what good behavior is. Good behavior is more than just doing 100% of what you say. Yes, you want a woman to follow instructions, but good behavior is also a woman who's honest and intimate with you as far as she expresses herself in an honest manner and she's respectful about it. If a woman is expressing herself and she's being vulnerable with you, never punish a woman for being vulnerable with you and telling you the truth. Unless there's something that crosses every boundary and principle that you have to the point where you know you have to cut her off. All right, cool, you might have to do that. But a woman could easily just lie to you and keep it pushing with her life like nothing happened. So reward honesty, reward vulnerability. Even if it's a tough conversation, never punish a woman for being honest and vulnerable with you. Because that's how you encourage the desire to split up the animus and her to have a daddy versus father effect. And to see you as an overbearing father who's trying to control every aspect of her life. And once the pleasure and the intimacy is taken away from that dynamic in a way where she feels it's a little playful, where she feels like, damn, this dude is where I go to express myself when I have thoughts and feelings and fears and desires and insecurities. Every time I express my thoughts, feelings, desires, feelings and thoughts and insecurities, he's always beating me down, then that woman is going to lose a feeling of emotional safety, and eventually she's going to shut down, and that is going to affect her sexually unless she's still digmatized, and she's going to keep getting the dick. But guess what? She can go find some better dick. Never think that you're always going to be the best dick, because guess what? Once a woman gets comfortable with you on a certain level, unless realized chemistry becomes greater than curiosity, then some new dick is going to be better than yours just because it's new. It ain't even got to be better. 3 weeks later from now, she may realize, damn, he was a better lover. But that doesn't mean that dick is everything, right? Also, something to understand is this. When a woman starts to shut down with you emotionally, she is going to have very selective memory about the sexual experience she's had with you. So a woman may forget you've made her squirt. A woman may forget you gave her 30, 40 orgasms back to back. A woman may forget that you've given her cervical orgasms. So a woman may forget all of that shit because she no longer feels emotionally safe, so that sexual shadow starts to shut off towards you. So emotion does play an aspect in it. And what I'll say is this: when it comes to a new woman, right? When it comes to a brand new woman, her emotional baggage is not your fucking responsibility. But for a woman you've been dealing with for a while, it is. To a certain extent, it is. Right? Understand that when you first meet a woman, your dominance is most important, but in the long run, your masculinity, your ability to lead is what's more important than anything else. So understand positive feedback loops. It's Coach Brody. I'm out.